KE0OXS and
That HHO that you were talking about a little while ago sounded interesting.
oh, I missed the discussion a little while ago, so I'll have to get some fill-in on that later. But anyway, good evening and thank you. Let me let you sign here, and then I'll take off with this.
Okay, this is KX0 or KE0OXS, buddy.
Very good. Please chime in if you'd like with questions or whatever. Do feel free. Good evening, Northern Colorado. This is N7GES, and this is the NCARC TechNet. We welcome all discussion, and glad to have input from everybody, questions, suggestions and tips, whatever you would like to offer. Tonight we have an interesting topic that I hope we have plenty of people to fill in with, and that is DIY systems, do-it-yourself radio systems, kits, homebrew, things you've put together. Do they work? What's the advantages, disadvantages? Anything else about them that you'd care to discuss? So that's what we're dealing with this evening. I want to start out with a few check-ins just to see who's available. KE0OXS, I might as well take you first here since you were in here earlier. And what was the name there again, sir?
I go by Buddy. My nickname, my real name's Lloyd. I don't know, you probably know Dean from KE0KBS. That's my son.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you, buddy, joining, and glad you're here. Yes, he's talked about getting you on the air and stuff there, so I'm glad to hear you. Very good. Okay, and other check-ins, please.
Kilo Echo 0, Quebec Charlie Romeo, mobile, Robert, no traffic.
This is KE0OXB, Scott in Fort Collins.
November 0, Bravo, November, Kilo, Rick, Fort Collins. If you missed the conversation earlier, Kevin, we just can't tell you.
Oh, mercy.
Alpha Sierra Papa, Terry in Berthoud.
All right. Let me stop there and get who I got. Rick, that was Henri. W0ASP, welcome. N0BNK. KE0OXV and KE0QCR. to all of you. Well, this sounds, Rick, this little temptation about the earlier discussion, I don't know what to say about that one. That's interesting. But anyway, we'll talk about that later, maybe, one way or the other anyway. Welcome to everybody. Do we have anybody else who would like to check in before we get started?
Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, Kevin.
This is
This
November
is
0
Delta
Echo
Zulu,
Mike
David
Papa,
Greeley.
Craig, Fort Collins.
Owl Canyon. Good evening, Kevin. KB0SCX, George and Bertha. Kilo Echo Zero, Sierra, Italy, Longmont with an announcement.
Okay, let me take a break here. I know I got N0EMP, Greg. Was it Dave, W0DDZ? Was that you in there?
Yep, affirmative.
Okay, excellent. And I think we had November 0 Romeo Delta Charlie. Is that call? Did I get that call right, Robert? Or Rob?
Actually, Whiskey 0 Romeo Delta Charlie. There you go.
Okay, thank you. All I got is Owl Canyon, but I knew who it was. KD0SCX, good evening, George. And KE0SI, welcome. Let's see. One more chance for check-ins here before I take your announcement.
Kilo 0 Delta Bravo Echo, Debbie in Fort Collins.
Fort Collins. This is November 0 November Yankee Bart Mobile Boulder. Good evening.
Okay. I know we had at least 3, and I only got 2. K0 DBE, Debbie, good, welcome, and N0NYY, welcome. Who did I miss?
Kilo Delta Zero Whiskey Bravo Charlie. That's Pete. Sorry about that.
No problem. There's, it's always, there's always a chance for doubles, so sometimes you just have to go back and pick up people as you get them, so very good. Any others before we get started? Okay, let's go back here. If I can find it in my log. Oh, KE0SI. What's your name? You gave me Longmont, and what's the name? And if you'd like to go ahead with your announcement, please do.
Thank you. This is KE0SI Longmont. I'm part of the Longmont Amateur Radio Club. We have our annual Hamfest this coming Saturday starting at 9 a.m. It used to start at 8, but this year we're starting at 9 a.m. The doors will open, and we're open till later, part way into the afternoon. So it's the Longmont Amateur Radio Ham Club Hamfest, Saturday, the 7th of April, at the Boulder County Fairgrounds. And anybody and everybody would be invited. I just picked up from a Silent Key a Heathkit linear amplifier, and Tektronix oscilloscope, and some other test equipment. So it'll be all for sale by the club to whoever wants to be there. I've got and then there's an old radio, Kenwood or something. Anyway, the point is that it's going to be a fun Hamfest. Anybody's invited. Thank you for giving me a moment. This is Kilo Echo Zero, Sierra, Italy. And the name here is Doug, David, Oscar, Uncle George. Thank you.
Okay, very good, Doug. Does anybody need fills or more information from Doug on the LARC Hamfest? Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Doug. And you mentioned Heathkit, and that just goes right along with what we're talking about this evening. The days of building kits, some of us think, some people think they've gone by the wayside, and others realize that there's still kits out there and still stuff to be built. Some people are building completely from scratch, and some people are building from kits, or you might say partial kits in some cases. So let's talk about the type of equipment that you do yourself. I have no official speakers lined up at this point in time. Would anybody like to open with some discussion of equipment that they are or have used in the past? Give me just a call sign, and I'll recognize you and turn it over to you.
NYY.
I was hoping you'd jump in there, Bart. NYY, go ahead.
Zero NYY. Recently, I have had a need to build several interfaces between audio boards, serial ports, and rigs for APRS line packet type applications. So that has turned out, I mean, yes, you can go buy a cable that does that from a computer to your specific radio, and I've got like 7 different radios that I want to experiment with. I'm not going to go spend anywhere from $20 to $70 a piece for cables for each radio. So I've built them. So it's a matter of a little bit of determining what does the radio need. Some want, a drop-in resistance to key. Some want a short to ground to key. Some want a power supplied to key. So you have to get from a serial port to do that. And then you have to have the audio going from the radio to the soundboard, and that normally takes a little bit of filtering or conditioning. Audio from the computer into the microphone. If you've got doesn't require as much conditioning, but some is still in order to keep the signal clean. So, love to build those little things. They're cheap and easy. Lots of directions online if people want to look those up. And for those that aren't experienced doing that kind of thing and are worried about it, don't hesitate to ask. It's always fun and a great place to start out. Really, really simple, minimal components. And Zero NYY back to net.
Okay, very good. And just curious, have you had a chance yet to do anything with the BitX40 or Micro BitX?
The Micro BitX, which I would consider a partial kit, it comes with 2 completed, tested circuit boards and a bag of components, connectors, a pot, and a little encoder, some push buttons, and a bunch of audio jacks. And you hook connectors that have wires already on them, you hook them up to the various components. So there's a little soldering involved, and plug them in. And I've got that thing about 95% assembled now. I was hoping to do some more this evening, but it got to be a pretty long day at work, so I'm just now on my way home. It'll have to wait till tomorrow. Delightful little kit. Have a nickel. The Micro BitX is a QRP, or 10-watt, 10 through 80 meter CW and sideband transceiver. No AM, no FM, and you can get more than 10 watts if you want to, but that's how it was designed. They're extremely popular. The best thing about it, the whole caboodle was $110. And throw in my Y back to net.
That's a pretty incredible 80 through 10 rig for that price, and I understand that they perform quite well. Has anybody else had any experience with the BitX series, either the Micro BitX or the BitX 40, or I guess there were some previous BitX units out there even before the Arduino chip, which is being used in the right now. Yeah, I'm really sorry there aren't a few other folks on here that I know of that have used them in the area, because I know we've had some fairly good results already with people with them. Very good. Okay, Bart, you brought up the area of radio interfaces, and yes, that's with the digital communications that we have available. That's become more common as well, both for digital HF communications or VHF, UHF, excuse me, and for rig control. A lot more people are doing using a program to control the rig, to choose a frequency, to set the frequency, to log contacts and various things. So I don't want to necessarily go into logging programs and stuff tonight, but certainly interfacing to the radio is one of the things that improves and makes those work as well. So can I ask if anybody else has made any of their own equipment, interface, cabling, that sort of thing, for their equipment to connect to other things? Okay. I imagine there's been more building out there than we're hearing on the air this evening. We just don't have the right few people that are kind of ready to speak up about it at this point. So I have in my desk drawer, just another topic, I have in my desk drawer a Pixie 2 kit, which is a 40-meter CW-only transceiver. One frequency, controlled with a crystal, very low power. I don't remember if that thing will even do 1 watt, but it's a great learning tool. It can be used for communications. Anybody used one of those with any success, any experiences, any comments regarding a very small, very minimal CW transceiver?
Can't be the only one, but N0NYY.
Go ahead, please.
In addition to the Pixie, there are several others. One that comes to mind is called a Tiny Tornado. It's, I think, 2 or 3 transistors, probably a total of 12 components. And it is also a CW transceiver. And you build this thing on, I mean, I could literally build that into the case of a watch if I wanted to. But just so small, so few components, and you look at this thing, you look at the schematic, and it's like, it's hard to believe that this would actually do anything, but hook a piece of wire up to it. The receiver's a little broad. The first time I got one working, I must have heard like 5 CW QSOs at the same time. This one has an LC network for tuning, so it's very broadband, but it works. Puts out about 150 milliwatts on a 9-volt battery, and it receives really, really well. But again, hard to, a little tough. That's what you get for, $10 worth of components. A little tough to pick out some of the conversations because you hear several at a time. Depends on the conditions. You could do a tighter VFO, you could do a crystal. Lots of ways to improve that, but you can build the thing in an evening. A lot of fun. Very similar to the Pixie, I think, except for the tunability of it.
Okay, very good. 2 questions. Was that it was not restricted then to one frequency, and were you ever able to do a QSO with it? I don't know how much CW you're currently not doing much CW, but I'm sure in the past you've done a bit more.
Well, yes, my CW has never been good. I made my 5-minute words a minute to get my Tech Plus back when that was the thing to do, and didn't use it much after that. I did throw out my call on that little thing, and I did hear my call come back to me in 3 or 4 other, with 3 or 4 other signals. So I wasn't able to get back to that person. I was not able to understand their call, but I did send out my call, and I did hear my call come back. And that's as far as I got with it. And I think the adrenaline took over, and I got all flustered. I tried a few more times, but I I did not have an actual QSO with it, but I did hear my call sign come back once.
W0ASP with a question.
Well, you got through anyway, Bart, and that's terrific. Yeah, good evening, Terry. Go ahead, please.
Well, I had a question to Bart about, I missed what brand that little radio was, and I was wondering also, how is it tuned?
The radio is the schematic. It's called a Tiny Tornado. You can look it up on Google and get it. It was tuned with an LC network, a little variable cap and a little inductor, and used the variable cap for the tuning. And the inductor I just compressed and squished until I got it into a band where I could hear stuff. And I couldn't. I did actually get a frequency counter on it, and I knew where I was, and I was able to hear myself on another receiver, so I knew that it was transmitting. But as I said, it's about 100 or 150 milliwatts.
And Bart, is that a single band, or does that do multiple bands?
I believe mine was set up on 20 meters, and I'm not sure. I think it can do different bands depending on where you tune it, but the only tuned circuitry is the frequency selecting tank circuit. So I guess if you made that at 40 or 80 or whatever, it would go there and do that. I'm honestly not sure. I just built it the way they showed it, and I listened around, and I found it, and by golly, it worked, and I was so amazed that I lost my ability to concentrate.
Okay, yeah, I can understand. I would suspect that you'd have to put in different inductors and capacitors to tune to a different band.
I would imagine that's true. I wound the inductor for it, and I had a little variable cap, very, very small value, so I didn't have a lot of range with it. But yeah, I think you could make a larger inductor and tap it and do all the normal stuff that you do for variable frequencies, or changing the bands. But I honestly don't know. I never looked to see if there was components for other bands, but I know there's the circuits for that thing, or the schematics for that thing are all over the place. N0 NYY.
Yeah, just speculating. If it's simple LC tuning, then there's probably a default capacitor in there for the band, and then a smaller tuned capacitor to tune within the band.
I believe that you are correct, and I believe I did not have the necessary parts to do that. So I just wound it. I calculated what it was supposed to be from the capacitor, which had a value on it. I'm thinking it was maybe 100 picofarads, and wound a coil that was supposed to sort of mathematically put me where I was supposed to be. And then I played with the windings on the coil until I heard signals and called it good. Pretty coarse, really, really coarse. But again, what do you want with 2 transistors and a dozen parts, you know? And I ordered enough parts to make a whole bunch of these, so I have bags of parts. And I would be happy to give them away if somebody wants to build one.
Okay, thank you, Bart. I'm very impressed with the minimalist approach. W0ASP back to net.
Yeah, me too. This is N7GES with the NCARC TechNet this evening. We're talking DIY radio systems and equipment, and that definitely qualifies. I think to me it just sounds like it would be fascinating to make a contact on something like that that you put together yourself and built, and was the simplest thing possible. So, you know, sometime that's something I would really like to do. And Bart, I'm assuming you didn't, of course, even have a printed circuit board for that. Did you put that on like perf board, or just wire things together, or you know, this is coming from somebody that has really done very little of this type of thing. Certainly no homebrew type, total homebrew type stuff.
I think I built 2 of them, perhaps. They're on perf board that I got from Radio Shack, and the perf board exactly matches the breadboards that are about 5 or 6 inches long, and had the same, like I said, same pinout. So you've got rows down the outside edge for your power and ground, and then ICs would fit down the center of it, and each pin of the IC has 4 additional pins that you can hook stuff to. Well, there were no ICs, it was just transistors, and I probably could put 4 or 5 of them on one board. I mean, really not much there. And that was the board I used because I had several of them handy, and I think there's even a couple in my bag with all the other parts.
Oh yeah, I've now seen some of those perf boards that are pre-configured like breadboards. Those are very, very cool. In fact, my CW voltage meter is built on one like that. And I guess that's a project I could mention at some point here shortly. Any other discussion on any of these topics that we've covered so far? or questions that any of this has brought up?
Question.
EMP, go ahead.
Yeah, M0EMP, a question for Bart. On the micro BidX in particular, is that just ordered direct from India? And how did that process work for you? Or is there a U.S. reseller? I believe the boards are all made in India. They said by a group of little old ladies, so they say. So the ordering, that was a bit of a process. HF Signals, I believe, is the name of the website, all is one word, where you order them from. And when you order them, they'll tell you, thank you for your order, and then you wait weeks and weeks and weeks. Sometimes they tell you that your order has shipped. Apparently, occasionally, they don't. And I asked, and they said, well, it should ship within the next couple days. Then I asked again, and they said it should ship within a week. Now, this was around Christmas, and I heard that they were absolutely slammed. And it took me about 4 weeks to get mine, and then one day, with no additional shipping data or anything, it just showed up at the door. So that is, everybody on the HF Signals websites has said about the same thing. Sometimes they tell you they thank you for your order. They tell you they're going to tell you when it ships, and they don't. So it's a nuisance. But if you're going to get a multi-band CW sideband radio for $110, I guess you don't want to complain too awful loud. Okay, so it does ship from India. When it did finally arrive, it had shipped from India. Roger, I'm sorry. You asked that, and I forgot to answer that. All right, thanks, N0EMP. N0NYY.
And so far, I don't believe I've heard of anybody being upset or disappointed with their order or having any difficulties with it. Have you, Bart?
There have been some guys that have had some difficulties. There are some directions and some useful pieces of information scattered out throughout the somewhat random documentation. And they tell you late on in the process that the two heat sinks on the FETs are connected to the, I think it's the sources of the FETs, and not to let them touch each other, and not to let them touch anything else. And the biggest problem I've heard is people having dead FETs. Now, these FETs are extremely sensitive to static, and a lot of people that are getting these and putting them together probably are not using static mats. And if you don't use a static mat in Colorado, I almost guarantee you're going to damage something somewhere along the way. It's just such a difficult thing, and those FETs are so incredibly sensitive. Once they're in the circuit and work hooked up and everything, they're pretty reliable, and these come installed in the board, but still, you need to be a little bit careful handling raw electronics like that. Probably something that a lot of beginners are not aware of.
Okay, very good. Thank you. N7GES. Any other questions on the microBitX or any of the other topics we've mentioned this evening? We've talked interface cables. We've talked minimal CW type transceivers, and we've talked the microBitX. There's lots of other options out there. Anybody have additional topics or questions about any of these topics?
N0EMP with some observation.
Okay. We had a double I heard EMP go first, and then we'll come back to the other station.
Yeah, N0EMP, just with some observations. I grew up in the heyday of electronic kits in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, even into the 80s. You had Radio Shack / Archer had a lot of really cool kits, and these were component level kits. And you had Heathkit, and later on you had Ramsey Electronics, which went out of stop their kit business a couple of years ago, and you could build board level kits for lots of cool things, and that's how I learned soldering, and that's how I learned electronics and troubleshooting. That's really all pretty much gone by the wayside now as far as building stuff at the component level, which I think is sad. And along with it, a lot of the surplus stores that we used to have around are gone, where you could go and get parts at a reasonable cost, especially walking into a brick and mortar store to get them. That's disappearing too. On the flip side, you've got a new generation of builders and makers who are using pre-assembled boards that go together, and they're based on computers and microprocessors. So now you've got Raspberry Pis, and you've got all sorts of hats that can plug in to do different things. And then you've got the Arduinos and the clones of the Arduinos and the shields that go on top with different things. So there's not so much board level or component level building anymore, but what's taking its place is modules you can plug together, but then you do the programming. So where you didn't learn the component level electronics, you're learning programming now and software. So I guess that's just a general trend, and that's where things are going. Just an observation. And N0EMP.
Okay. I appreciate that definition of the differentiation of the kits, and I was thinking about it, but hadn't been able to express it in good terms there. So the MicroBitX definitely fits into the category of pre-built boards and doing minimal wiring, but still having the ability to design your own unit by where you place things and additional programming you might want to do to the Arduino, you might say microcomputer that's integrated into that unit. Whereas the Tiny Tornado is all component driven from ground zero. So we have several different types of things there. I appreciate that definition. There was another station with Greg. Come again, please.
This is W0ASP.
ASP, go ahead.
You know, I have to kind of sadly agree with Greg that the days of building things from components seems to be fading. But I'm still going to promote that. And one of the bright spots about building things from components is the remarkable simplicity we have in building custom circuit boards. This is something I've done, and something like Bart's Tiny Tornado, it sounds like something that just screams for a learning exercise to use a programming, a schematic capture program like Eagle, and create board creation files and email those off to a board house and have circuit boards come back and then be able to populate them. The ability to have very professional looking circuit boards at almost ridiculously low prices, even in very few quantities, is remarkable nowadays. And that is one advantage that we have compared to 20 years ago. W0ASP.
RDC.
RDC, go.
I gotta agree with Greg there as far as our technologies go. We've got a new generation, you got an older generation, and it is sad that the old component level repair type stuff is going by the wayside. Now that's what I grew up with, and yeah, I assembled a Ramsey Electronics 20-meter receiver kit. Interestingly enough, my boy was the one who ordered it, and he said, "Dad, help me build this." So we did, and we were able to tune in WWVB with a little bitty one-wire, 12-inch long antenna from out here around El Canyon, which is not too much, not that far away. But at least we got it built, and it worked. W0RDC, thank you.
SCX.
SCX, go ahead, please.
Hi, I wonder, now that you have built had your circuit board built, you need to populate it with surface mount components. I'm frightened. Has anybody tried surface mount construction?
NYY.
NYY, go ahead.
I think somebody might have doubled with you, Kevin, there.
Oh, okay. NYY first then, and then we'll check back.
0NYY. I used to do surface mount boards, modification, testing, and stuff for a living, so I have no problem doing the surface mount stuff. I don't recommend for a beginner to do a surface mount board. I would do a through-hole board. And on that note, you can buy copper-clad boards and etch resist and etching acid and literally draw, etch, and drill your own boards by hand. It's a bit of a tedious process, but there's nothing like doing it yourself. And the rewards that go along with it are phenomenal. But I'm going to recommend through-hole technology for the beginner stuff. You can still have boards made for it. You can use project boards of various and sundry types for it. But yeah, as Greg said, it's kind of becoming a lot less common for people to do component level stuff anymore. It saddens me as well, but such is technology. N0NYY, back to net.
Okay. There was another station at the same time, or apparently right after Bart. Come again?
Oh, that was me, W0ASP.
Okay, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, comments on the surface mount. It seems scary at first, but if you only have to do a few of them, and your eyesight is okay and your hands aren't too shaky, it can be done. I highly recommend getting a hot air soldering station where you can put it's a solder that's not the traditional wire solder, but it's a bunch of solder beads embedded in a paste, and if you put that on the pads and then take your component and put it on with tweezers and a little pin to hold it in place, you can hit it with the hot air. Working with surface mount is doable. You might need a little bit of magnification. Let this drop. And on the circuit board building, Bart, yeah, I remember the days of using the, I forget what chemical it was, the etch compound, and drawing on the circuit board and etching a copper plate. And yeah, those are the good old days too. But you know, the idea of actually building a circuit board on the computer and then having it actually fabricated somewhere, I find personally fascinating. And I said it's not so expensive to be out of the range of the amateur radio operator. W0ASP, back to net.
NYY again.
Yeah, first of all, George, did that kind of answer your question there?
Yes, it did. By the way, I want to mention a local source of prefabricated circuit boards, mostly mounting components with interfaces, is Spark Fun Electronics in Gun Barrel. And you can walk in and buy things.
Thank you. Yes, and a local company, well, fairly local to boot. I have looked at their website. You can easily look at that. Lots of fun stuff. And yeah, and George, I guess you realized when you asked your question that you know, not all of the stuff you might want to build if you had a board would have to be necessarily, well, I guess you'd say surface mount. Through hole, you know, is the other option. And maybe I'll go ahead and talk about my little meter here. Let's see if we can hear it real quick, as long as I can locate it. So that was 12.1 something. I didn't quite copy the last digit, but that's my voltage meter that was built around an Arduino computer, or microcomputer chip, I guess you'd say, to make the terminology. There's probably another terminology. That was prefabricated on a breadboard, and then moved to a smaller chip and on a perf board and hooked up in the same configuration. So I didn't do all of that myself, but I did at least design the program and came up with the wiring necessary. Not that there was much to it. So that was built with that sort of technology, and it has been one of the most useful things I've had in my shack to keep track of my voltage of my deep cycle battery that I have in here, AGM battery. So there you go. Incredibly useful, and I would have never dreamed a few years ago of building something like that had it not been for being able to program something, which I could do, and then design a few components around that to do that with. Okay, NYY, I believe you had something additional. Oh, and this is N7GES with the TechNet. Go ahead, Bart.
0NYY for the beat. With regard to the circuit boards, I agree that designing the board on the computer is an excellent thing to do. It's another piece of education, and it is where today's technology is going. So it's a great idea. The other thing I was going to mention is once upon a time, you could get these clear transparencies at the office place, and you could draw your schematic and reverse it and print it on the transparency, and then lay the transparency on the slightly roughed up circuit board with steel wool or something of that nature, and iron it, and the toner would release from the plastic and stick to the copper, and the toner was actually etch resistant too. So you could make pretty elaborate, pretty detailed circuit boards that way, and you might go touch up the toner afterwards with an etch resist pen as well, but some guys told me they never had to do that. So yet another way to go about it. But board manufacturer has become a lot cheaper. I remember back in the day they would charge you $15,000 or $1,500 just for setup. And then when you started printing off the boards, you had to sell an awful lot of them to make that money back. Obviously, that is not true anymore in Zero and YY.
Wow, that's fascinating. We may have to talk more about that at some point in time. So we're talking, we've talked an awful lot of different concepts here. You know, some of them, and we've not even touched on tubes, interestingly enough. Nothing that old, but it's certainly there in another area of kit building, which is sort of perhaps in the past to some degree, but some people are still fiddling with it. But we haven't even touched on that, and we've still hit a lot of different techniques and technologies to accomplish some of these things. I think that's really, really fantastic. So, any questions that any of this has generated for anybody else? Okay, for the few of you who have been able to comment and contribute and that sort of thing, let me ask this: why? And some of this has already been expressed, but let's just talk a bit more. Why would somebody want to tackle building something of their own? What's the reasoning behind doing that, as opposed to buying something pre-made? As I said, we've discussed some of this already, but let's get a few further viewpoints from people on the whys of doing something like this.
SCX.
Yeah, go ahead, George. SCX.
30 years ago, I paid $500 for the privilege of putting together my own IBM PC compatible from a Heath kit, just to be able to say, I built that. KB0SCX, back to net.
Okay, yes, and I can remember lots of people building things like that, and the satisfaction factor there. Fantastic. Other things, please.
KC0RBT.
And a comment?
Okay, we had two. I'm going to take RBT first, please.
Very good, Kevin. Yeah, I've been listening in this evening, and I've built quite a few Arduino projects, and I guess the thrill to me is that I'm building something that no one's ever built before. I have a voltmeter that captures the low and the high. I have some things on the cabin up in the high country that monitors water temp and a few other things, and some of those products are not actually available off the shelf. I would prefer to buy off the shelf because it usually is going to be about the same price and a little more professionally done looking. But some of the projects I built are one of a kind and meet my needs. So that's why I've gone to that route. KC0RBT.
Very cool, Jim. A good observation. I appreciate that. I think the other station was LAO. Is that right, Luann?
Yes, indeed it was. The other educational piece of building something from the ground up is you understand it. So when you get your shiny new expensive radio, you understand how it works and are better able to troubleshoot things that go wrong with it. Absolutely. And how many times have we had something happen with a
a radio that we've purchased and not quite understood what's going on, and that's a good point. Oh dear, have I just lost my my computer device here? That's not cool. Okay, that's neither here nor there. That's just my own personal notes. Other comments, please.
NYY.
NYY, go.
When I started building stuff as a kid, it was because it was prohibitively expensive to buy. And I learned the rewards of building something and having it work. And learned lots of times how to make smoke come out of various and sundry components as well. And the resistors can actually smoke more than once, not so much transistors. Anyway, I loved the experimentation of it. I would spend hours and hours and hours finding parts, putting them in, changing things, measuring, and all that. And when you finally get done with all of that, it's very rewarding to have something you built work. When somebody else comes along and says, "Holy smokes, you built that yourself?" Oh, that's worth an awful lot of hours of hard work. Let's go back to the board again. N0 NYY.
ASP?
ASP, go ahead.
I like all these comments because I agree with them all. And I think the reason that I build things myself is because I consider it investing in myself. I learn how something works, how to make it, and I consider that to be a very important aspect of amateur radio. W0ASP.
And now you have built a lot of things as well as amateur radio related equipment, I would imagine too, Terry. Is that right?
Oh yeah, most of my construction are for scientific purposes or for educational, as with the big telescope here at Little Thompson Observatory in Berthoud.
And again, I would imagine that some of that stuff also is one-of-a-kind type things that you may not have been able to purchase in some cases too, right?
Oh, very much. Or if it was available commercially, it would be horrendously expensive. And but there's always a huge educational component to that. You know, especially when you're working with a school and you want to teach electronics and radio technology. You know, let's build a little bit of something. We can't build everything, but at least we can build something.
GES with the TechNet. Any other comments or questions that this has brought up for anybody?
EMP.
EMP, go.
Yeah, I did just want to point out that, in particular with regard to amateur radio, the ARRL handbook has a lot of different projects in it. Then there's the various antenna books that they sell that have antenna projects, unsurprisingly. And if you go down to HRO, for instance, and you can look through all the different books they have down there, there are a lot of amateur radio books that have projects in them that are either circuits you can build or antennas or other such things that are amateur related that are all build it yourself. and 0 EMP.
NYY.
NYY, go.
Well, lo, these many, many, many years ago, Radio Shack, with the assistance of a fellow, I believe, Rudolph Graf, produced a large number of experimenter books, mostly little paperback books, 40, 50 pages maybe. And they had all different ones. They had ones on the basic components, resistors, capacitors, inductors, diodes. They had one on transistor projects, op-amp projects, audio projects, light projects, LED, all. I don't know how many titles there are. I have 30, maybe 40 of them, different ones. And I don't know how many they made, but they were all designed for people. The way they're written, I would say younger people or people without a lot of technical expertise. Excellent beginner's books. I have, like I said, I have a substantial collection of them, and if someone was interested in more information and borrowing them, I will not part with them long term, but I would certainly loan them out for people that wanted to build stuff. There's even one all about power supplies, and it talks about current and ripple and calculating your transformer and measuring how well it's performing and regulation and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. Power supplies, that's important still today. And anyway, another 2 cents and 0 NYY.
Yeah, and I would venture to say that probably a lot of that content, even if the actual publications weren't available, would probably be locatable on the web as well by Googling or that sort of thing, huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are some bigger books. If you look up Rudolph Graf, Golf Romeo Alpha Fox, I think it is a single F. There's probably a bunch of books. In fact, there's a directory of electronic circuits that he put out that has, this is like an encyclopedia, that's 6 1/2 inches thick. And I'll bet there's 500 or 1,000 circuits in that book. I mean, it's incredible. And explanations of how they work and why they were designed the way they were and what happens if you go a little this way or a little that way with a different component value and all that sort of stuff. My little trivial effort to resurrect component level electronics fascination.
Well, I have to say it's not perhaps going as far, but the Arduino and the interest in that has certainly brought me some renewed interest in components, even though some of that is a little less component-oriented than computer-oriented. But yeah, it's those types of things that get us interested again in doing other sorts of things. I appreciate the name the authors and the suggestions of earlier publications. I think that could be very helpful. And sometimes things like that pop up on the web at various points, or there's scans or whatever. So, be on the lookout. But also know that there's plenty of modern information out there on the web as well that would probably reflect a lot of those basics, and at least could get you started in those kinds of things. This is N7GES with the NCARC TechNet. Other questions, maybe, that this has brought to mind from anybody with all these topics here?
Whiskey, India, Quebec.
WIQ, good evening, welcome, and go ahead.
So when it comes to technology, I have to blame my father significantly because he worked on radios and televisions back in the vacuum tube days. And I just kind of picked up the technology from there. So, I mean, technology is not a single idea because there is physics involved, there's science involved, there is RF situations there. I mean, hey, if you can become an amateur radio operator, you have made the decision to go on a learning cycle. And that's good because, well, I say life longevity can be helped a lot by the idea of having questions in your mind to have them answered. And there are quite a few people out here that can answer just about any question. And of course, I'm pretty well seasoned in electronics, so that's the situation. Back to Knett.
You know, I heard you make a comment just now I hope people really do take to heart. If you're an amateur radio operator, you've committed to a learning cycle. And you know, I think that's actually very, very true. The licensing that has been put forth has committed us to learning about what we're doing. And I think sometimes we forget that. We think, well, we're just taking a quiz to get our score the points to get our license, and that's it. And I think we're sometimes forgetting the learning part of it. So you know, once you've learned what you need to know to get the license, that doesn't necessarily mean the learning is over, especially because the first time you've learned it all, you might not remember it all, certainly, because you're not maybe going to use all of it, but you're going to use parts of it. And you may end up finding you come back to some of that stuff you haven't learned at a later point because of what you're working on. So that was a good point, Carrie, and I thank you for mentioning that. And I think, you know, whether any of us decide to go out and start building more kits or not, we're still in a learning cycle, and we don't want to let that stop with the Baofeng. So there's my soapbox. Sorry to preach, but I think that was an important point that all of us should probably remember as amateurs. And there's a lot to learn. Not just kit building, not just what kind of radios and what they do, but a lot of other things as well. So, good point. Thank you very much. N7GES with the TechNet. Any other comments from anybody? Okay. Is anybody on here that has built their own transceiver and used it, you know, more than once or twice?
WIQ?
WIQ, go.
Well, in the past and even now, there are kits that are bound for building different things. So a kit that is really well documented will teach you a lot. You don't have to know all the little intricacies of components and all that to build a kit. You just have to know a little bit about soldering and a little, well, not a little bit, know how to solder and follow instructions, but you should be able to learn a lot from building a kit, too. As a matter of fact, I got a kit that I never got working because something about the RF input didn't work. So that's it. And I didn't have time to work on it, so that's my excuse. Back to Ned.
Well, there you go. And it does require some time, but it's time well worth. I know that we've got a lot of folks on this repeater that have built their own equipment and used it. So I'm just sorry they're not here, because I know we would hear a lot more about this if we just happen to have had a lot of the other folks on here that I know that I have talked to in the past. So it is too bad. I know that we've had people in this area that have built their own equipment from ground zero, their own transceivers from ground zero, and used them, and or from kits and used them. And so it is unfortunate that we don't have them with us this evening to talk more about this. But it is doable. It's been done. It's still being done, I think, and it's fun to hear about those kinds of things. Let's see. There was a comment I was going to make, and I've lost it. Any other comments at this time, or questions, or anything along these lines from anybody?
NYY.
NYY, go.
I regret that I have not built a transceiver of my own. The BedX being the closest I've come. Well, yeah, I haven't used it a lot, the Tiny Tornado. The most rewarding thing, ham radio related, that I have built is called an FBLR Doppler. Front, back, left, right. It's basically two Dopplers at 90 degrees to each other and used for fox hunting, and it works famously well. So in this modern age of digital electronics, there are Dopplers with large rings of LEDs that indicate direction, but the FBLR just had 5, a yellow one in the center, and 4 green ones around the outside. And if the front one was the only one lit, the source was in front of you. If the front and the left were lit, it was about 45 degrees to your left, and so on and so forth around the thing. But I used that thing a lot, and I still have it, and one of the most rewarding things I ever did, and 0 in my life.
K0LAO.
LAO, go.
Well, I stumbled on a treasure trove of information because, as most everyone knows, that I don't have the electronics background that my primary reference book does. And there's a site that is called electronics-tutorials.ws, and it goes through AC circuits, amplifiers, attenuators, anything that you want, any information. Very well written, very understandable. And I started at the very beginning with circuit theory and wave theory, and I'm just digging my way through that rabbit hole.
Okay, can you run through, can you confirm for me that was electronicstutorials.ws?
It is electronics, with an S, dash, tutorials.ws.
Okay, thank you very much. Got that written down here. Any questions for Luann about this? This is fascinating because giving us a chance to catch up on what we haven't learned if we haven't been working at the component level either ever or for a long time.
SCX.
SCX, go.
I'd like to recommend another source. That's eevblog.com. Dave Jones is an Australian electronic engineer who has got a wonderful YouTube channel.
Okay. Now, is that Echo Bravo blog?
Echo Victor blog.
Okay. So there's a YouTube channel and and apparently a website there, echovictorblog.com, and a YouTube site. Thank you very much. And did I get that straight, or is there any other info on that you want to pass along?
That's all. It's a wide variety of things. His motto is, don't turn it on, take it apart. And he does lots of teardowns of equipment and test instruments.
I love the motto. I'm writing that down here too. Wow. Other comments, please.
Oh, W0ASP, I just have to ask this.
Yeah, go ahead.
With all these build-it-yourself electronics, what are people using for a source of clean DC power?
NYY, go.
You just can't beat batteries. Nothing is cleaner. Anytime I have noise issues, unhook the power supply, go to batteries. What a difference it can make on occasion. A rack of 4D cells is 6 volts and a little more, and you can regulate it to 5 if you want to, but most 5-volt equipment doesn't mind. And 4D cells will supply more current than you can imagine for, not super high current stuff, but, 1 or 2 amps easily. And for the trivial stuff of digital electronics and whatnot, they'll run for just about forever, it seems. Can't beat batteries for clean, smooth, and reliable power, and portable, and 0NYY.
ASP, were you, Terry, were you prepared to make suggestions, or were you looking specifically for certain power ranges or current limits?
Well, actually, Kevin, I was asking a bit of a leading question because when it comes to do-it-yourself, a lot of even the board level stuff does not come with a power supply. And if you're going to assemble this radio, you're going to have to power it somehow. And there's another opportunity for the amateur radio operator to understand important technologies involved with AC to DC power conversion and how to do that without introducing radio noise.
Okay, yeah, just making sure that we had accomplished what you were asking about, and I kind of figured maybe that was the reason for the question. And yeah, that suddenly applies no matter what you're doing, even with the Arduino projects. And I was really, really glad that my little Arduino kit came with a 9-volt battery clip to its power supply, because it made it very, very simple, and it was an easy way to get it started and get it working, as well as keeping it very clean. And yes, I have had to learn about various ways of supplying it power. My voltage monitor requires good steady power in order to monitor the voltage correctly, but it also does not have any very highly complex voltage regulator in the detection circuit. So yeah, I learned a lot from just the power needs of that device. So point well taken. Any other comments on that line? Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here and a lot of information. I'm not absolutely sure what to suggest for, kind of closing this up or wrapping it up, except that I hope that we've encouraged some people to experiment. With radio, certainly, but not only with radio, with other electronic components. And if you think about your radio shack right now, there's certainly more than just radio involved here. We talked about interfacing radios with computers, which requires some electronic work. We've talked about other things in the shack, such as various meters and power supplies and things like that. We've talked about the associated equipment we sometimes are using in our shacks that involve microcomputer or computer-like processors. We haven't even begun to talk about antennas, which of course a lot of people are already building, and which requires a lot of that same understanding, but just built in a different way. There's so much stuff that we could cover in that area that we haven't even begun to touch on, and all of it offers that learning experience of knowing what's going on with your equipment when you flip the switch. So I hope that we've encouraged some of you who have never tried anything like this before to give some of these things a try, whether it even be a very, very simple kit that you just simply solder a few wires or components to. I don't know. Bart, would you consider the BitX to be one of the simplest kits you've probably dealt with as far as for an intro to electronics, or would there be other things that would fit better in that bill?
I'm sorry, was that directed at me, Kevin? I had a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, it was, and that's okay. What I had asked was, for a starter kit, would something like the BitX be a reasonable thing to do, since the boards are already so much assembled already and that sort of thing?
I would say absolutely. There's a couple reasons. Number one, all the pieces that you're going to solder, you're soldering to wires. Those wires go to connectors. Those connectors snap onto the board. If those connectors have pins that are available. If you had to completely redo it because you had a problem, you could. You can sit there and look at the connector and say, yeah, the red wire goes to the center of the pot, and the green wire goes to one side, and the black wire goes to the other side. When I turn the volume up, it goes this way, and so that would be the loud side, and things like that. And it's just a bunch of nice little parts. You're doing wires onto terminals, plenty of room to work, nothing critical, nothing really, really tight. An excellent starting place, and I think the rewards in completing it are going to be pretty tremendous. And I will say that the RF system is controlled by what's called a Arduino, which is an Arduino that's been paired with a PLL, phase lock loop frequency generator chip. And that's all open source code, so if you want to play with the software, you can do so. There's already tons and tons of hacks, mods, changes, and whatever out there online for it. But yes, I would absolutely recommend it as a beginner's kit because the soldering is just so easy to do. You do have to build your own case, however. Plastic, wood, metal, doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be a metal case, even though it's a radio. Lots of guys put them in plastic and leave them there. Yes, I rate it highly as a beginner's kit, N0NYY.
WIQ?
Yeah, let me come back to you in just a second. So I'll just finish my thought, and then I'll come back to you, Kerry. Even if you start with something that is as complex as the BitX, but still easy to build, and some people almost don't consider it a kit because so much of it is done, but it is a kit. Or you do something very simple with an Arduino project, just to put something, or you build an antenna. There's plenty of those around that are simple. I just hope that maybe we've inspired some of you to give some of these things a try and just see what you discover and how much you enjoy what you have accomplished. WIQ, go ahead, please.
Well, somewhere in my career, I learned that if you thoroughly understand the working of a power supply, then you can understand almost any other circuit. Well, that need to be shaded a little bit with newer digital technology, but on the other hand, if you build a power supply and it does what you want it to do for whatever project you're working on that needs a power supply, then if you try a different project and the power supply doesn't hold up to that one, you can adjust the design of the power supply to make it work with the new project. Things like that. So, hey, it's just one of the ways, because one way or another you'll probably wish you had a lab quality power supply. If you go into any kind of building it, chances are it will have to have a power supply. Like Mark said, a pack of D cells is nice, but an AC to DC power supply of low quality, multiple power outputs, and all this kind of stuff, which you could build yourself and learn a lot just doing it. That's a good starting point. I'll just put it that way.
Well, it's definitely a starting point for several reasons. Certainly, you've got to have power to do anything else, and as a foundation. So that's a good point. Anyway, so I hope we've helped you. I'm sorry that we haven't had a bit more input from other folks. We've had good input from who we've had, and I appreciate that very much. I would have hoped that we could have gotten folks that have built other devices, more complex, less complex, and things like that, just to chat about here. But I think we've still had some very valuable information, even for today's beginning builder, and I'm glad that we've had that chance to present that, and I hope that we've brought all of you something to benefit from. So I'm going to leave one more break for any other comments or questions, and then I will propose next week's topic and see what kind of static I get from it, and then we'll close this off. Any other comments? All right. I had a suggestion from somebody that we discuss again mobile radio installations. We've talked about this before, but it's something that keeps coming. It comes up over and over, especially with newcomers coming into the hobby and getting ready to install a radio. And some things bear repeating. So at risk of repetition, I'm hoping that we can at least bring some of the old points back to light again very quickly and maybe cover some new questions so as to help get people steered in the right direction when they're putting radios in their cars. Either if this is the first time ever, or if you're dealing with a newer car where things have changed from the first car you put a radio in 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're hoping that we can help people out by answering some of those questions for people next week. Any objections to that topic? Please speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, that's the first time tonight that silence was golden. I always like to hear responses from people, but I'm glad to hear that that seems good to most of us. So we'll cover that next week. Please come prepared with your questions, your suggestions, your tips, especially with newer cars. I think that's going to be a big issue now. If any of you have electric cars, I know that sometimes can be a different issue from the standard car. There's probably any number of things that are somewhat different now in considerations for putting in a radio. So do please come with your ideas, and let's see if we can make it a very enlightening and maybe even concise picture for people that are wanting to do this and do it right the first time. Thank you all very much for your participation, and comments are welcome. Remember, we have the YouTube channel, the NCARC YouTube channel now, which hosts all of the recordings from our past nets. I did fail to mention that these nets are recorded for persons to live stream if they're not in radio range, or to review back to after the net is over. I always want to encourage people not to let that be a stumbling block to you, because we're not here to record for perfection and posterity, but for people to have a reference of the ideas we come up with. So I do hope that that does not dissuade anybody from participating. We also have our Elmer's page at elmers@ncarc.net for an emailing area where you can ask questions. And I think if you have questions for the TechNet specifically, that's a reasonable place to email them, as I will be receiving those along with other people. So if you have questions specifically about the TechNet, that's a place you can probably enter those as well. Any other resources I've missed, Dave, or anybody?
Nope, you covered everything on this end, W0DDZ.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. So, again, thank you all. 73s to everyone, and this is N7GES closing the TechNet and returning the repeater to normal use. Good evening to all, and happy Monday.
This presentation was brought to you by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.